Early morning at JFK International Airport, the first rays of autumn sunlight were shining, casting a soft golden light on the metal surface of hundreds of containers stacked in the cargo handling area. The air here was thick with the scent of jet fuel mixed with the aroma of hot coffee from the service counter for the night shift workers. The sounds of forklift horns, barcode scanners, and hurried voices mingled with the cold, biting morning breeze created the soundtrack of a busy morning at the busiest logistics hub in the United States. Amidst this hustle and bustle, no one seemed to notice a strange occurrence near the container section from Australia. A customs dog, a beagle named Max, was standing across the container doorway, preventing it from closing. A few loading workers tried to pull the latch rope and signaled Max to move, but the dog remained still, staring intently inside the container with an unusually alert expression. Its tail was slightly curled, ears pricked up, and its back arched, clear signs that a working dog was in a state of detecting potential danger. "What's wrong with that dog?" a frustrated voice called from behind. It was Supervisor Halden, who was in charge of coordinating the international cargo area. He walked over, glared at Max, then turned to the operations officer. "Tell your people to move that dog. We're falling behind schedule because of it." But Inspector Julia Carter, who was responsible for Max, didn't give any orders. She observed Max's behavior for a moment, squinted, and then walked quickly over to the dog. "Max, what's going on?" she asked softly, her tone not commanding but more like asking a trusted teammate. Max glanced at her briefly, then turned back to the container. Its wet nose was sniffing the air inside, and its front legs remained motionless. Julie immediately sensed something was wrong. In their 2 years of working together, she had learned to trust Max's instincts implicitly. The dog never disobeyed orders unless it detected something extremely serious. "Stop all operations around this container," Julia said firmly, her voice decisive. Some of the staff stared at her in disbelief, and some even protested. "We need this space for the shipment from Istanbul. We don't have time for a dog's prank," an older man from the forklift crew shouted. But Julia ignored them all. She took out her tablet from her belt and opened the shipment records. The shipment from Australia, as she remembered, consisted of medical equipment, some agricultural products, and notably 2 eastern brown snakes being sent to the Bronx Zoo. Everything appeared to be in order, the paperwork was complete, and warning labels were clearly affixed to the outside of the container. But Max wasn't wrong. Julia knew that. While documents could be forged or systems could malfunction, Max's nose had never failed her. While many thought Max was overreacting, Julia felt a growing sense of unease in her chest. Something in this container wasn't right, and her dog was trying to warn the world before it was too late. Everything in the warehouse continued to operate noisily, but for Julia, all the sounds seemed to fade, and the only thing she could hear was Max's heavy breathing, the only rhythm she needed to focus on right now. Julia swiped her finger across the tablet screen, accessing the detailed declaration for the shipment that had caused Max to react strongly. The information appeared quickly. Sender, Australian Wildlife Authority. Recipient, Bronx Zoo Herpetology Department. Special items, 02 eastern brown snakes. Pseudonaja textilis. Condition, alive. Danger level, high. Transport license, verified. She swallowed, her eyes fixed on the words, eastern brown snakes. Not only are they among the most venomous snakes in the world, but they are also notorious for their aggression and lightning-fast reactions. Although they were packaged in specialized shipping boxes with insulation, safety locks, and internal protective cages, Julia knew that even the smallest mistake in handling could turn the entire warehouse into a disaster scene. A technician had already begun preparing the safety scanner to inspect the inside of the container without opening the door. Meanwhile, Max remained fixed on the container, his small ears upright, his body stiff as a board. Julia could clearly feel it. Max was on alert, not just curious or excited like usual. "The equipment is ready," the technician announced. Julia stepped closer to the display screen, accompanied by two other staff members. The first scan image appeared. The first specialized plastic box came into clear view with a large snake coiled inside, the temperature around it stable, exactly as required for storage. The scanner moved to the left, to the second box. But this time the screen only showed an image of an empty box. There were no living creatures inside, no heat emanating from the snake's body, just a cold, empty space. "Probably due to the scanning angle," one staff member guessed, starting to rotate the device to check from a different angle. But no matter how many angles they changed, the second box remained empty. Julia frowned, her stomach sinking as if weighed down by a stone. "Impossible," she muttered, quickly pulling up the shipment declaration. "Both are adult snakes measuring 1.2 to 1.5 meters. There must be two of them." She quickly called the receiving department at the Bronx Zoo to confirm. A male voice came clearly through the phone. "We confirm, yes, we are expecting two eastern brown snakes, and both have been packed and sealed properly from Australia." Max started to change his stance, suddenly moving closer to the side of the container, near the cooling system. Julia recognized the shift in his body language, from alertness to high-level alarm. Max's nose was continuously sniffing the metal surface, his tail almost stiff from tension. Julia stepped closer, crouching to inspect. From the position where Max was sniffing, she noticed a slight indentation in the steel shell of the container, a dent that seemed harmless at first. But upon closer inspection, she saw that the rubber seal at the edge of the box was misaligned, not enough to be noticed unless viewed up close, but completely enough for a slender, quick, and agile snake like the eastern brown to slip through if it found the right opportunity. "We may be facing a snake escape," Julia said clearly. The air immediately became still. All eyes turned to her. One staff member instinctively stepped back, his eyes wide. "You mean, it's loose here somewhere?" Julia nodded slowly. And Max just confirmed it. The warehouse was still operating as usual. Containers were being lifted, trucks driving by, barcode scanners beeping. No one outside knew that a single small creature, hiding somewhere in the shadows, could bring the entire warehouse into chaos. Julia stood up, her expression serious as she looked at the supervisor. "I need this area isolated immediately. Because somewhere among this cargo, a silent killer was hiding, and Max was the only one who had warned in time." Within 5 minutes of Julia's request to isolate the area, the entire A7 section of the International Cargo Warehouse at JFK was sealed off. Forklifts were forced to stop, staff were moved out of the danger zone by law, and a temporary barricade was erected to limit further contact. While no official confirmation had been made, the presence of an eastern brown snake out of control was enough to make everyone act quickly. The change in the atmosphere was palpable. No more laughter, no more loud voices, only hurried footsteps and anxious glances. Amidst the tension, Max remained the silent center, never passive. The small beagle quietly sniffed every crack, every corner, every container. Julia didn't give any orders. She simply followed, keeping a safe distance to avoid interfering with Max's natural tracking process. Max's gait had lowered, his body almost brushing the ground, tail still, ears down, signaling a dog fully focused on the scent he had detected. A technician approached with a handheld temperature sensor, a tool that could detect the heat from living creatures even if they were hiding in narrow spaces or insulated materials. Julia nodded, allowing the scan of the area where Max had been sniffing. The results showed nothing unusual. "No thermal signal," the technician shook his head. "It may have left the container earlier, or it could be in a place that doesn't reflect heat." Julia didn't take her eyes off Max. "If Max is on the trail, Then the equipment was wrong, she said, her voice firm. I don't doubt him, not even 1%. Max suddenly veered in a different direction, from the container area to a secondary hallway leading to the staff break area. This was a less frequented area during work hours, with only a few administrative offices and a break room with vending machines, a dining table, and personal lockers. Julia furrowed her brow. If the snake had indeed left the container, and if Max was correct, then it had left the main warehouse area and entered a space with people where no one was prepared or warned. Max started to speed up, a rare behavior for a dog who usually moves slowly and methodically. His front paws almost glided across the tiled floor, head low, breathing faster. Julia pulled out her radio, speaking quickly. Snake escape detected, heading toward the administrative area, side hallway 3. Immediate evacuation assistance required. She pushed open the double doors to the side hallway, quickly following Max. The atmosphere inside was eerily different, unnervingly quiet. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, making a faint buzzing sound. Max stopped in front of the staff break room. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood still, staring at the slightly ajar door. Julia approached, her hand gently resting on the doorknob, her heart pounding in sync with Max's steps. She pushed the door open, and the sight inside that froze every sensation within her. A young staff member was sitting slumped in a chair, trembling all over. His hand clutched his left ankle, where blood was seeping through the fabric of his pants, spreading across the floor. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. Nearby, a middle-aged woman stood frozen, holding a coffee cup mid-air, seemingly unaware of what was happening. Julia immediately looked down at the floor where Max was growling softly. She knelt down and shined her flashlight under the vending machine. And there, in the darkness, she saw two small, yellow-brown eyes staring back, a slender, long body coiled in a defensive posture. Its head lifted slightly, an unmistakable warning. The snake has entered the break room. A victim has been bitten. Request immediate medical assistance and snake catching team to administrative room 4, Julia said into the radio, her voice cold and decisive. Max stood there, eyes fixed on the target, ready to do anything to protect his team. In the small break room, time seemed to slow down. Julia stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the creatures slithering under the vending machine. The eastern brown snake, the one that had caused the entire warehouse to go into alarm mode, was coiled under it, its head slightly raised, eyes unblinking. The fluorescent light reflected off its smooth scales, revealing its distinctive bronze-brown color, a beautiful hue but a sign of death. Julia took a deep breath. She had been trained to handle dangerous situations, but no training could ever simulate the feeling of facing one of the most venomous snakes in the world, in an enclosed space with a bitten person sitting close by. Don't move, she said quietly, but with authority, to the middle-aged woman. She was trembling, still holding her coffee cup as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Just stay still. Any movement could make it lunge. The young man, Liam, nodded weakly. It bit me when I turned on the light. I didn't see it. I just heard the hiss, then felt like I was being shocked. He gasped for air, his lips beginning to turn blue, sweat dripping from his forehead. Julia glanced down at the bite. Two small but distinct fang marks. The swelling had spread up to his calf, and the skin around it had turned dark red. You can't move, understand? Julia said, then immediately spoke into her radio. Confirming victim bitten by eastern brown snake, showing clear signs of poisoning. Send medical team with specific anti-venom immediately and request snake handling team to the administrative room. Emergency situation. As soon as she cut off the communication, Max growled low and shifted into a defensive stance. Julia crouched down instinctively, placing a hand gently on Max's neck to reassure him. But she knew Max was calculating the snake's attack path. Both of them knew that if the snake felt threatened, it would strike again, and this time the victim could be anyone in the room. The door opened after what seemed like an eternity. A two-person medical team, wearing masks and carrying a first aid kit and stretcher, entered. Behind them was snake handler Rivera, a middle-aged man with a seasoned face and a sharp gaze. In his hand was a pair of specialized stainless steel tongs and a transparent plastic tube with a lock to prevent escape. "Where's the snake?" Rivera asked quietly. Julia pointed to the area under the vending machine. "It hasn't moved from its position. Max is keeping a close watch on its every move." Rivera nodded and began crouching down to observe. "We need to keep it from running into the wall crevice. If it gets into the ventilation system, it will be very difficult to control." He signaled for Max to temporarily back off, but Max didn't move. He growled softly, eyes never leaving the target, ready to protect Julia at any cost. Rivera worked with extreme caution, sliding the tongs between the vending machine and the wall. His flashlight beam illuminated just as the snake began to crawl backward toward the inside, looking for an escape route. "It's trying to get into the wall. I need support on the other side." Julia immediately moved around to the back, using her secondary flashlight to add more light. She crouched down, for the first time in her life, less than a meter away from the world's deadliest snake. Rivera adjusted the tongs, carefully changing their angle. But just as he did, the snake struck. It no longer slithered slowly like when it was hiding. A faint hiss rang out, nearly inaudible and less focused. Then it shot from under the vending machine like a living arrow, heading straight for Julia. Its eyes were cold steel. Julia instinctively staggered backward, her eyes locked on the long, undulating form speeding toward her. Just before contact, Max lunged like a lightning bolt. He flew past Julia, attacking the snake midair. A small thud echoed, and in an instant, Max had sunk his teeth into the back of the snake's head, pinning it firmly to the ground, holding it in place. Julia sat up, her heart racing, eyes wide as she looked at Max, the small, four-legged friend who had just saved her life. The break room sank into a moment of suffocating silence. Everyone, from the medical staff, Rivera, to the woman still standing, frozen, stood still, unable to speak. In front of them, the small beagle named Max was still holding the eastern brown snake down on the floor with the force of an extremely precise bite, right behind its head, in exactly the spot needed to immobilize the creature without killing it. A faint hiss came from the snake's throat as it writhed in helplessness, its body coiling in tight circles, but its head remained under Max's complete control. "Good God, I've never seen a dog do this," Rivera whispered, his face hardening, his gaze shifting from surprise to admiration. He slowly moved forward, taking the specialized tongs, and in just a few seconds, he and Max worked together like a veteran snake handling team. Rivera quickly lifted the snake's head, placing it into the transparent tube with a secure locking mechanism. Max, understanding the signal, loosened his grip the moment Rivera twisted the lock. A dry click echoed, marking the end of the dangerous Eastern Brown's chaotic escape. Julia crouched down, her palms trembling from the adrenaline that hadn't yet faded. She reached out and embraced Max, carefully checking every sign on his neck, muzzle, legs, and belly. No wounds, no bites, no bleeding. She breathed a sigh of relief. Max panted heavily, but showed no signs of pain or distress. "Well done, Max. Well done," she whispered, her eyes filled with emotion. It wasn't just gratitude, it was respect. While the medical team treated Liam's wounds, placing him on a stretcher and transferring him to the ambulance, Julia and Rivera were asked to maintain the scene for an emergency report. Soon after, Supervisor Dawson, who had previously questioned the decision to isolate the container, entered the scene himself. "What the hell happened here, Arrow?" he asked, his voice deep and tense. Rivera answered for Julia. An Eastern Brown escaped from the shipping box, bit someone, and hid in the break room. If it wasn't for this dog, Rodriguez would have been the second victim. Dawson turned to Julia, his gaze gradually changing from indifferent to serious. Care to explain? Why was the container left improperly sealed? Julia stood up straight, calming herself. I checked. There was a small gap in the rubber seal of the cooling system. It seems the container's shell was slightly dented, causing the internal seal not to close properly. When the container was tilted during unloading, the snake took advantage of that to escape. Do you have evidence? Dawson asked. We've taken pictures and have a technical report. Also, the Bronx Zoo confirmed they were waiting for 2 Eastern brown snakes, but they only received one on the scan. The second box was completely empty, Julia replied. Dawson paused, then nodded. I'll report this to the higher-ups. I'll also recommend that Australia conduct an internal investigation into the container sealing process. He turned to Max, who had quietly approached Julia as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He's not just a service dog anymore. What he did today, that's the act of a hero. Max simply looked up, licked his nose, and then lay down on the floor, resting his head on Julia's leg. The sight made several staff members who had just entered the scene hold their breath. A small dog, facing death without hesitation, now calm as if he had just completed a regular task. A young staff member whispered to the person next to him, I swear, I'll never look at a beagle as a cute puppy again. They're ninjas disguised as pets. Julia smiled softly, bending down to pat Max on the head. He's the reason we're all still standing here. That afternoon, the weak autumn sunlight gently filtered through the glass window of the coordination room at JFK Airport. The atmosphere in the room was completely different from the chaos a few hours ago. Now only a quiet stillness remained, mingled with the scent of cold coffee on the meeting table. Julia stood by the window holding a cup of coffee, her eyes fixed on the container yard in the distance, where the forklifts had resumed operation, though several areas were still blocked off for investigation. Rodriguez, Supervisor Dawson's voice rang out from behind. Julia turned around to see him walking in, holding a folder and a sealed envelope. News from Australia, he said, placing the documents on the table. They confirmed the incident was due to a technical error during internal packaging. One of the snake containers wasn't properly locked before being sealed inside the shipping container. When the container tilted during movement from the aircraft's hold, the box opened. They're conducting a deeper investigation and have temporarily suspended all live animal shipments until a safer solution is found. Julia nodded. We were lucky to catch it in time. No, it wasn't luck, Dawson said, his gaze softening. It was because you trusted Max, and thanks to him, we avoided a real disaster. He opened the envelope and pulled out a document with a red seal. This is the official commendation recommendation. I submitted it to headquarters this morning. You and Max will be recognized for your responsibility, quick response, and courageous action in an emergency situation. He paused, offering a rare smile. The snakebite victim has also regained consciousness. The doctors say he will make a full recovery after a few days of treatment. Julia took the document, but her gaze shifted toward the hallway, where Max was calmly sitting at the foot of the bench, his tongue hanging out as he breathed lightly, seemingly unfazed by the fact that the entire warehouse was now speaking of him like a living legend. Later that day, as Julia stepped out of the coordination room, she noticed something different. Down the hallway, the forklift drivers, technicians, and even a few office staff, who typically paid little attention to the K9 team, all stopped what they were doing to nod at her. Some looked at Max with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. That little guy sure isn't little at all, one of the forklift drivers chuckled, pointing at Max. Give him a biscuit. At least make it beef-flavored, another joked, causing everyone to burst into laughter. Julia bent down to pet Max's ears. Did you hear that? They're asking for a raise for you. That night, the sun had long set, but in Julia's backyard, the air was still gentle and calm. She sat on the porch holding a hot cup of ginger tea, her eyes following Max, now leisurely sniffing around the lawn as if patrolling his territory. No containers, no snakes, no pressure, just the smell of damp earth, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, and a rare feeling of peace after a long, tense day. Max came over, resting his head on her knee, his eyes half closed in relaxation. Julia placed her hand on his head and whispered, "You saved my life, without hesitation, without fear. You just did what a true teammate does." In that moment, Julia no longer saw Max as just a service dog. She saw him as a friend, a silent warrior, and a living example of pure courage that needed no words. Tomorrow there might be a new container, a new mission, new dangers. But tonight, just tonight, Julia allowed herself to let her guard down, knowing that no matter what happened, Max would always be there. The night had fully settled in. The yellow light from the hanging porch lamp cast down on the wooden steps, where Julia sat silently, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes still following Max, her four-legged teammate, who was now curled up by a patch of chrysanthemums, breathing steadily in the dim light. Nothing about Max's appearance indicated that he had just saved a life, subdued one of the most venomous snakes on the planet, and prevented a potential incident that could have locked down the warehouse for weeks. And perhaps, to Max, that didn't matter. Julia let out a soft sigh, her hand gently brushing over the old scar on her wrist, a memento from her years patrolling the border. But no wound had left as deep an impression as moments like today. She had faced death and been saved by a dog, a creature many still viewed as a working tool, a piece of living equipment. But not Julia. To her, Max was something different, the deepest connection she had ever had with any teammate. She remembered their first training session 2 years ago. Max, back then just a 2-year-old beagle, full of energy and incredibly stubborn. Two trainers had refused to work with him due to his lack of control and too much independence. But Julia saw something else, an extraordinary intelligence in his eyes. Not a mischievous dog, but a young warrior who hadn't yet met the right person to fight alongside. 2 years later, Max not only became one of the finest working dogs at JFK, but also an indispensable part of Julia's daily life. She didn't need to give many commands. Just a glance, a nod, and Max knew exactly what to do. Between human and dog, there was no need for many words, only absolute trust. Tonight, Julia opened her tablet and began writing the final report of the day. But after typing the opening line, at 08:27 a.m. on April 13th, while conducting an inspection of a shipment from Australia, she paused. All the technical events, data, times, and scene diagrams, the things she was required to report, could not convey the moment when Max rushed to shield her from the snake. There was no technical term to describe that. No report could capture her heartbeat at that moment, or Max's look when he looked at her, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm here." She closed the tablet. Tomorrow would be for writing. Tonight was only for Max. She stepped off the porch and walked over to the dog, who was still lying half asleep. Max heard her footsteps, opened his eyes, yawned, then exhaled in relief. Julia sat beside him, gently stroking his back. "You know," she said softly, "someone asked me today why I trust a dog so much." Julia looked off into the distance for a moment before smiling. "I was going to answer with your record, the number of contraband, drug, and endangered species fines. But after today, I think I only need to say one thing, because Max has never been wrong." She gently leaned her head on Max's shoulder, feeling the gentle warmth radiating from his thick, soft coat. In that moment, all the noise of the world seemed to disappear, leaving only Max's steady breathing. A simple sound, but today it had become the rhythm of loyalty and courage. And somewhere in this universe, perhaps heroes don't need capes or weapons. Sometimes they only need a sharp nose, four quick legs, and a heart that is always there for their teammate. Late at night, the city slowly sank into quiet, with only the distant sound of car horns and the faint yellow light filtering through the window curtains. Julia sat in the living room, the journal open in front of her, holding a pen but not yet writing. On the floor, Max was curled up, sleeping soundly, occasionally twitching his legs as if running somewhere in his dreams. Perhaps through a fragrant field, or maybe to a container that needed to be inspected. Julia looked at him and finally began writing. I used to think that skills were what made the difference between a good working dog and an ordinary dog. But today I realize the most important thing isn't the ability to sniff, hear, or react quickly. It's the connection. The ability to sense what humans haven't yet discovered. The absolute loyalty. Ready to face danger just to protect the one they trust. And Max has all of that. She paused, looked over at Max, then continued, I don't know if I can teach anyone else to be another Max, but I know I'm luckier than millions of people because I have a friend like him in my life. A few days later, at an internal press conference, a senior official from the Customs and Border Protection Agency stated, Max's case is not just a rare event. It's a living testament to the extraordinary abilities of animals, especially working dogs, in detecting and reacting to dangers that technology sometimes fails to catch. Max didn't just prevent a disaster. He saved a life. And he did it not for a reward, not because of an order, but for one reason alone, to protect his friend. The speech spread internally like a shining example in the professional world. The K9 training school included Max's actions in its training materials as a model case of intuition and loyalty. On the internal forums, trainers from all over sent congratulations to Julia, and many expressed their desire to meet Max just once in their lifetime. At JFK Airport, Max became the most talked about name in the break room, the canteen, and even during meetings. People joked that Max should be given a special employee badge and his own weekly meatloaf. But Max didn't care about accolades or admiration. To him, all that mattered was whether he could get to the airport early the next day, whether he could still run alongside the large containers, whether he could guard Julia's side while she checked documents, and whether there was something in those thousands of unfamiliar scents that he could help her detect first. Julia understood that, so every morning she would let Max stand by the door, waiting for the familiar question, ready to work, partner? And Max would always respond with a vigorous tail wag, a lick of her hand, or a light jump onto her leg, then run straight to the car like an excited child on their way to school. People often say animals have a sixth sense, something that humans have long lost. Earthquakes, changes in the weather, even unexplainable intuitions. Perhaps all of them begin with a sensitivity that doesn't come from the eyes, ears, or nose, but from the heart. Max doesn't need certificates. He doesn't need medals. He only needs a pat on the head, a trusting glance, and a person ready to listen to what science has yet to measure. And that's enough for Max to keep doing what he was born to do, protect the world by quietly sniffing out danger before anyone else notices. That afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight fell on the trees around JFK Airport, Julia stood in front of the customs unit's bulletin board, where a new photo had just been pinned up. It was a picture of Max standing next to her, both of them looking directly into the camera. Behind them was a container marked as Area of Previous Biological Emergency Incident. In the photo, Max held his head high, his deep brown eyes reflecting intelligence and alertness. Below the photo was the caption, Max, partner, hero, friend. The photo quickly became the talk of the airport. Staff passing by stopped, smiled, pointed, or simply nodded with silent respect. It wasn't because Max was a legend. It was because everyone felt something very real, very human in his actions. Something that technology, reason, and even orders couldn't create. courage born of love and pure loyalty. The next day, a group of students visited the cargo security area as part of a special educational program. The guide took them through the workstations and then stopped in front of Max, who was resting next to Julia's feet at the inspection area. A boy about 10 years old raised his hand and asked, "Why is that dog called a hero?" Julia looked at Max, then crouched down to the children's eye level and, "Because he did something that many adults wouldn't dare do," she replied. "He rushed between me and a deadly snake just to save me. No one told him to. He didn't think about the danger. He just knew I needed protection." The children were quiet for a moment. Then a shy girl asked, "Was the dog scared?" Julia smiled, her eyes glistening with a hint of emotion. "I think he was, but he chose to act instead of being afraid. And that's courage." That weekend, Julia took Max to the quiet suburbs, to a small wooden house she occasionally visited to rest. On the wide lawn, Max ran happily, sniffing the breeze, the earth, the dry leaves, all the natural and pure things. Julia sat on the bench holding a book, but her eyes still followed Max. In her mind, the image of that fateful morning replayed endlessly. Max's warning, his determination to prevent the door from closing, his action of rushing to block the snake's path, the look of resolve in his eyes. It was all unforgettable. But what moved Julia even more than that heroic moment was the calmness afterward, when Max simply sat by her, as if nothing had happened. No demands, no pride, just doing the right thing for the one he cared about. In the end-of-year report from Customs and Border Protection, Max's name appeared under the Special Achievement, Emergency Biological Rescue section. But to Julia, that name wasn't just in the records, it was in her heart, in a place no one could ever replace. Because sometimes the bravest teammate doesn't need to say a word. They just need to stand by us when danger comes, and just need to trust us enough to protect with everything they have. And Max, with his small pause, steady gaze, and unconditional loyal instinct, taught the world one thing: a hero is not the strongest, but the one who does what's right, without hesitation, even knowing the price they might have to pay. A week after the incident, when life at JFK Airport had returned to normal, a small but meaningful event was held at the K-9 training area. There were no flags, no red carpet, no television cameras, just a simple internal ceremony among those who truly understood the real value of courage. At the training center, Max was presented with an honorary badge for working dogs, a small tag bearing his name, with the inscription on the back, "For loyalty, for courage, for companionship." Julia stood next to Max, gently stroking his head, and when the unit director bent down to pin the badge onto his collar, Max stood still, his eyes wide, seemingly still unaware of why so many people were clapping today. But even if Max didn't fully understand all the praise, everyone there understood one thing. Max's actions didn't just save a life, they also saved trust. Trust in the instincts of animals, trust in teamwork, and above all, trust that in a world full of turmoil, sometimes the smallest creatures hold the biggest hearts. In the following days, Max's story spread beyond the airport. Professional forums, animal-loving communities, and even international news outlets shared the heroic actions of the small beagle in New York. The article, "How Max the Dog Saved a Life from a Deadly Snake," quickly became a highlighted post, attracting millions of views. In Australia, where the fateful shipment originated, the National Biological Regulatory Agency announced a new, stricter procedure for transporting live animals, using the JFK incident as a prime example of the importance of multi-layered inspection and international cooperation. A spokesperson said on television, "Not just one life was saved, but an entire international process was alerted, thanks to a dog named Max." As for Julia, she wasn't seeking fame or rewards. When a journalist offered to interview her and Max for a television program, she politely declined. Max doesn't need to be famous, she said. He just needs to work, to be trusted, and to hear me say every day, "Good job, Max." That's enough. However, a small but meaningful change took place. Julia's workspace, which used to be simple with a few files and family photos, now had an additional small painting on her desk. A picture of Max sitting in the middle of the warehouse, behind him rows of containers, with light gently streaming through the glass roof. On the frame, she had taped a note: "Instinct never lies. Listen and trust." One quiet morning, when Julia opened the car door, Max was already ready to jump into the back seat, his tail wagging lightly as usual. She looked at him and whispered, "There's no snake today, but who knows, right?" Max responded with a big yawn and a short bark, as if answering, "Let me take care of it." And so they began another day, not with tension, but with trust, that when you have a friend like Max by your side, no danger, however silent, can slip past his nose. Because Max is not just a working dog, not just a hero, but the one who keeps the safe rhythm of breath for a world that sometimes humans are too unaware to feel. Sunday night, the autumn wind gently blew through the old wooden fence behind Julia's house, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, earthy and peaceful. The sky was clear, filled with stars. A quiet night, no alarms, no beeping scanners, no blinking lights from the rows of containers stretching like a maze at the airport. Only the soft sounds of insects from the distant fields and Max's steady breathing as he lay stretched out on the wooden porch beside her, peaceful as if no danger had ever occurred. Julia sat still, her feet resting on the old stool, her hands cradling a warm cup of cocoa. Everything had passed: the reports, the meetings, the investigations, and even the congratulations. But one thing could never fade: the feeling of knowing that her life had been placed in the hands, or rather, the jaws, of a creature who could not speak a word but was loyal enough to rush into death to save her. No modern device could have alerted her. No human could have sensed the danger. But Max knew. He knew. And he acted, without a second's hesitation. Julia had once read somewhere that loyal dogs do not act out of duty, nor for rewards, but because of unconditional love. A kind of primal, pure affection, unreasoned and uncalculated. Just like Max, a hero without a crown, only with soft fur, but whose actions shone as brightly as any medal of honor combined. She bent down and looked at Max, his eyes closed but his ears still twitching. He was always alert. He was always ready, not out of fear, but because he understood. His duty was to protect. No one taught him that as a command. He was born knowing. Max embodied everything beautiful that humans had ever hoped for in animals: instinct, loyalty, humility, and never turning away in the face of danger. Julia lightly touched Max's collar, where the honorary badge had been pinned just a few days ago. A small piece of steel, but holding the great story of life and trust. Max paid little attention to it. For him, every day spent working with Julia, every breeze he got to sniff, every scent no one else could detect, that was the greatest reward. Suddenly, Julia's phone vibrated. A message from an old colleague, someone who had trained working dogs for years. It simply read, "Thank you, Max. He didn't just save you, he reminded all of us why we chose this profession." Julia finished reading, set the phone down, and looked at the night sky. A shooting star passed by, fast and quiet, just like Max's actions. No warning, no preparation, no second thoughts, just showing up at the right moment and doing the right thing. She bent down and gently hugged Max from behind. He shifted, nuzzling his head into her hand, breathing softly. Julia whispered, "Good night, partner. Tomorrow we continue. Not for the title, not for the mission, but because we are a team." And in a small corner of the world, unknown to anyone, in silent peace, A hero lay beneath the moonlight, ready for tomorrow. No fanfare, no fireworks or recognition, just a friend to protect, and a reason to keep going. His name is Max. The next afternoon, the sun began to set behind the rows of containers stacked like a miniature city behind the airport. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the gaps between the crates, casting long streaks of vibrant orange across the old concrete floor. JFK Airport resumed its usual rhythm. Containers continued to be unloaded, forklifts honked their horns, and international shipments kept coming and going nonstop. Everything seemed as if it had never stopped. But for those who had witnessed the events a few days ago, everything had changed. In the domestic inspection area, Max continued to move leisurely between the rows of crates, sniffing every shipment as usual. No one looked at him the same way anymore. Even though he was still just Max, still the small beagle who loved sniffing food bags and jumping on chairs when he wasn't supposed to. But every security officer, from the senior officers to the gatekeepers, nodded to Max as he passed by with a silent respect in their eyes. A new staff member from Texas, after hearing the Max versus Snake story, whispered to a colleague, "I thought they were joking. But when I looked into his eyes, I understood. This dog doesn't need anyone to tell his story." Julia smiled softly when she overheard that. She knew Max didn't fully understand the fuss around him. He was simply doing the job he was trained to do, and doing it better than anyone had expected. But to her, Max was no longer just a partner. He was a living testament to things beyond textbooks, beyond every operational procedure. That evening, after finishing her shift, Julia and Max headed back to their small house in the suburbs, the place they often retreated to every weekend when the schedule allowed. No noise, no planes, just green grass and a sky full of stars. Max jumped out of the car, running around the yard as if he had just been led into the first real freedom of his life. He rushed to the familiar old tree, then buried his head in the fallen leaves, searching for something invisible, perhaps an old scent, an instinctive memory. Julia sat on the porch, removing Max's collar. She looked up at the sky, her hand still holding Max's honorary badge, the one she had carefully brought back to hang in a special corner of her office. Not to show off, but as a reminder to herself that there are lives that quietly pass through this world, leaving deeper marks than 1,000 headlines. She took out her phone and opened her photo gallery. She scrolled through pictures of Max, sniffing a suitcase, lying with his legs crossed in the break room, playing in the grass. Then she stopped at the most recent picture, the moment Max lay next to her feet, holding the snake tightly while everyone around them was in panic. Julia zoomed in on Max's eyes in the photo. His gaze held no fear, no anger, just focus, trust, and determination. It was as if he was saying, "I know what I'm doing, and I'm doing it for you." She smiled softly, put the phone away, then called gently, "Come here, Max." He immediately ran over, jumped onto the porch, and rested his head on her lap, exhaling a long, relieved breath. And in the peace of the night, Julia knew that, no matter what tomorrow would bring, no matter what other dangers they would face, she would never be alone. Because Max was always by her side. Not just a working dog, not just a hero, but a special soul choosing to stay with her every day with silent dedication and unconditional love. Monday morning, the light rain from the night before left shimmering streaks on the patrol car's windshield. Julia turned on the wipers, waiting for Max to jump into the back seat as usual. He didn't need to be called. Whenever it was time for work, he knew his place, sitting quietly, waiting for her to drive out of the parking lot. Today was an ordinary day, no emergencies, no suspicious containers, no snakes escaping their cages. But since that fateful day, Julia had learned that normal was never really normal when you live in a world as complex as this, where danger can hide behind a seal, lurk under a valid barcode, or sneak through things that seem perfectly controlled. And because of that, she was even more grateful for Max. not just because he had saved her life, but because he had taught her to listen to her instincts more, to trust in things that were not immediately visible. Even with her training in a disciplined environment, Julia understood that unease for no reason sometimes is survival. And Max embodied that feeling, a living biological machine, unaffected by reasoning, only responding to the truths that his nose and heart could detect. On the way to the warehouse, Julia recalled something her old instructor had said during the K9 training years ago. Dogs never lie. When they alert, it means something is wrong, even if all the machinery around says everything is fine. And it was true. Everything that day suggested nothing was wrong. Clear records, valid shipment codes, intact outer seals, fully functioning scanning devices. Only Max disagreed, and it was because she listened to Max that a disaster was averted. Not everyone has the patience to listen to a dog. Not everyone has the trust to believe in a creature that doesn't speak human language. But Julia did, and now she reminded herself every day that keep your mind steady, but never abandon your instincts. When the car stopped at Warehouse Area A7, the one that had been locked down, a few workers waved at Max when they saw him. One joked, "Is our hero here to inspect my lunch sandwich today?" Julia smiled. "Be careful. If he smells beef, nothing will stop him." Laughter erupted, light and genuine. It was something that, just a few weeks ago, in the ever-tense atmosphere of the international airport, was rarely heard. But Max had brought it back, through actions, not words. In the afternoon after her shift, Julia stopped the car by a small patch of grass behind the administration building, and she opened the car door and Max jumped out, starting to run around, but being this time not to track a scent, but just to chase a dry leaf carried by the wind. Julia watched the scene, her heart filled with peace. In that moment, she understood that what Max left behind was not just the memory of a heroic act, but a way of life. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary thing come from the simplest creatures. And in a world full of noise, where people are always pulled toward haste and quick results, Max was an invitation to live slowly, mindfully, and with trust. Max didn't know he was a hero. He only knew he had a teammate he loved, and his one mission was to protect that person, every day, in every way.